this is a BMW 3 Series, and this is also a BMW 3 Series, and that's it.
Whoa, 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 whoa. They might be both BMW 3 Series, but these are 10 years apart in age, and so much has changed between 3 generations of these cars. There's so much more to talk about than them just being 2 3 Series.
But they're just 2 BMW 3 Series.
Not this time.
Now, this one here is a 2011 328i, which means this is BMW's 5th generation of the 3 Series, also known as the E90. Now, as you can see, this thing sports the BMW's typical front end styling. It's a pretty conservative looking car. You do have the typical BMW kidney grills, which have been around since the beginning of the 3 Series back in the 70s. And of course, it is the sport styling in the front because it is BMW's entry-level sport sedan. It does carry the typical hood style of moldings where it's a little bit more aggressive than most other sports sedans in the segment.
That is the E90 generation of the 3 Series, but behind me is the G20. This, of course, has a lot more aggressive styling and a lot sharper lines. You have more aggressive headlights, larger kidney grills, and just all around up front, just more sharper lines in general. In fact, it is more technologically advanced too. On the window, you have the connected drive, which is BMW's self-driving technology, and even then, these slats in the grille will open to improve aerodynamics and cooling when you're driving. Overall, yes, a lot has changed between these 2 generations since they are 10 years apart. But I think the G20 has also kept the spirit of what a 3 Series is.
Now, the previous generations to the 3 Series all held the same moniker. They were lightweight, they were short, they were little small cars that were meant to go quick around corners. While as they didn't have a lot of horsepower, they were very good when it came to handling. This one, on the other hand, as you can see, is more bloated than the previous generations. It is also longer and it is wider. But that's also a good thing because when you sit inside the E90 generation of the 3 Series, you do have a lot more legroom, you have more space in the back seat for passengers, and overall the cabin just feels more roomy.
Now, with every new generation of the 3 Series, of course, they are going to get bigger and wider. That's no exception for the G Series. Of course, this is a lot wider and longer than the previous generations of the 3 Series, including that E9X generation. Moreover, you have a lot more sharper lines on the side of the body, more interior room, of course, and a better powertrain.
Now, as we mentioned earlier, this is definitely one of the most, if you want to call it, experimental generations of the 3 Series because of the powertrains that BMW ended up doing. Now, while this specific one, this is the N52, it is a 3-liter inline 6 with about 230 horsepower. This is old school BMW. It's an inline 6. You could have gotten it with a manual, so this stuck to it. The other one, on the other hand, is not very much BMW because it was the first time ever that they stuck twin turbos to one of their inline 6s. We're talking about the N54 in the 335. And while that engine does have its own slew of problems, it was definitely something BMW had to do to open up the path for modern day inline 6 such as the N55 and the B58.
Now, of course, over the years, BMW has downsized their engines in the base model 3 Series. Instead of getting a 3-liter inline 6, you get a 2-liter turbocharged inline 4. But the difference is on this one, it makes more power and more torque. That makes 230 horsepower. This one makes 255 and 295 pound-feet of torque with an 8-speed transmission. And Consumer Reports say this is a more reliable engine than what's in that E9X Generation 3 Series. So, though you do get a less good-sounding engine and it is smaller, still a good powertrain.
Now, we are sitting in the E90 interior, and in typical base model 3 Series fashion, it's not a bad interior to be in, but it does lack a few things. Of course, it does have the typical BMW gauges where you have the speedo on the left and then the tach on the right. In this different one, they did change it up a little bit. You no longer have a temperature gauge, you only have a gas and an MPG gauge. And as of everything else in the interior, there is a lot of plastic components, which is to be expected. This is the cheapest BMW you could have bought back then. In this specific one, it is pretty well optioned out because you do have what BMW enthusiasts call a double hump. It does have BMW's iDrive system, and while it's still not perfect, it's a lot better than the older generations. And this is, in fact, the first 3 Series that you could have gotten iDrive in, because the E46, while it did have an option for navigation, it wasn't an iDrive system. It was its own little thing. Of course, one thing in the E90 generation of the 3 Series that never works is the cup holders, because you can see as I'm trying to push it, it doesn't come out. It's a typical thing with these cars, and while this interior does feel good in terms of driving a luxury sedan. I do think the newer generation BMWs are a lot better in terms of the materials used and of more space, because in this one, while it is bigger than the previous generations, you do feel a little bit more crammed in here.
Now, the inside of the G Series BMW 330i is, of course, a lot more advanced in technology terms and comfort terms and everything else on this car. And of course, on the inside of this car, the technology is a lot more advanced than that one. The infotainment system, though, this is iDrive 7, that last one was iDrive 3, and this infotainment system has taken a lot of its functions and controls from that generation of 3 Series, which of course is normal. And you even have a live cockpit digital gauge cluster in this one, which shows plenty of information or anything you'd like. Of course, now the interior is a lot more laid out to be a luxury car rather than what that one was, because let's all be honest, back then the 3 Series was a little iffy when it came to how many plastics it had. On this one, you also have things like ambient lighting, more connectivity, including USB Type A and Type C, and overall just a better feeling interior with nicer materials and better build quality.
The E90 generation of the 3 Series has seen the one that is the most controversial, honestly, because they started experimenting with different ways of making the car faster, handle better. But even nowadays, you can find yourself a really good deal, especially like with this one. This is a 328, and you can pick one of these up with relatively lower miles for around 7-8 grand. And while the car is aged at this point, I think it still holds up in terms of technology, in terms of how it drives. It is a very solid addition to the 3 Series lineup.
And that's absolutely true, because this car was the car BMW started taking risks with, and it's led to things like the F generation and the G generation of the 3 Series, which were both a lot more put together and a lot more reliable than these are. You never hear anyone complaining about the problems with the G20 or the G80 powertrains, and it's because BMW had that era of unreliableness with these cars. But of course, they had to have that like every other car brand has, and like I said, this is a very well put together car. And that's only because BMW went through a bunch of different metamorphoses with their cars.
And while he is correct, this is definitely the most experimental of BMW's 3 Series generations. You can go ahead and experiment with all of our other videos.
And if you like this video, make sure you hit that like button down below. And if you want to see more from us, make sure you subscribe. And we'll see you all in the next video.